Last fall, Alex, along with my partner Jamie, moved into a quaint, slightly aged house nestled on the outskirts of a small town in Oregon. It was a steal, given its sprawling 7-acre land, which included a dense forest that stretched behind our new home. The appeal of rural life and the thrill of potential wildlife sightings excited us, despite the isolation. Our third evening in the house, Jamie and I decided to relax on our back porch, which overlooked the dense woods. As dusk turned to night, we switched on the dim patio light, casting eerie shadows into the trees. That's when we first heard it, a rustling in the woods, about 150 feet from where we sat. Expecting a deer, or maybe a coyote, we were startled when a figure emerged from the underbrush. It was a man, disheveled, with wild eyes. He just stood there staring in our direction. Uneasy gripped me as I called out, asking who he was. No response. He just continued his unsettling gaze. Concerned, I firmly told him he was trespassing, but he remained unmoved, his eerie stillness unbroken. After a tense minute, he slowly retreated back into the woods. Jamie and I retreated inside, locking the doors behind us. The next night was even more bizarre. Around midnight, I caught a glimpse of the same man from our kitchen window, standing at the forest's edge, his eyes fixated on our house. I watched, frozen, before mustering the courage to confront him. The moment I opened the door, he vanished into the trees. The following morning brought a new horror. Our backyard hose was left running, flooding our garden. I suspected the mysterious man, but with no real harm done, I hesitated to involve the police. But then the following day shattered my restraint. As I prepared to leave for work, I discovered my car tire savagely slashed. Enraged and desperate for answers, I ventured into the woods. I knew it was risky, but anger clouded my judgment. Following a narrow, improvised trail, I pushed deeper into the woods. After a few minutes, a snapping twig froze me in my tracks. There he was, the strange man, not far off, partially hidden behind a tree. In his hand, something glinted menacingly, possibly a knife. Our eyes locked, and a jolt of terror propelled me into a frantic sprint. I crashed through the undergrowth, heart pounding, until I burst out of the woods into the clearing of our backyard. Jamie was about to leave for work. I shouted for her to get back in the car, my voice trembling with fear. We drove off, putting distance between us and the house. Once safe, I explained everything to Jamie, and we called the police. The authorities later discovered the man had been living in our woods for some time. He was caught, thankfully, though his motives remained a mystery. It was a relief to know he was no longer lurking in the shadows of our once peaceful refuge. But the memory of his haunting presence in our backyard still sends shivers down my spine. A couple of years ago, I made a temporary move to a small town in Oregon due to the nomadic nature of my job. The assignment was to last around a year. The house I rented was quaint, nestled in a seemingly peaceful neighborhood. It was an older structure, but its charm resonated with my non-fussy preferences. In the initial weeks, everything seemed ideal. Work kept me away most of the time, but the house was a cozy refuge whenever I returned. The neighborhood, too, appeared welcoming. However, the house bore signs of its age, particularly with the outdated, somewhat unattractive wallpaper that adorned the living room and stretched down the corridor leading to the bedrooms. I had initially planned to leave the wallpaper as it was, considering my short stay, but after hanging a few pictures, the wallpaper's dull design became increasingly bothersome, so I decided to remove it. Climbing a ladder for a closer inspection, I immediately noticed something peculiar. The wallpaper, with its black and green pattern, black on top, green below, had a strange, uneven texture. Upon peeling back a section, I discovered a narrow 3-inch gap running along the top of the wall. My curiosity piqued as I peeled more away, revealing a small, wiry device tucked behind the wallpaper. The gap extended back several inches, peppered with holes connecting to the upper floor. As I continued, a chilling discovery was made. A small camera, expertly hidden behind the wallpaper, its lens barely perceptible. My heart raced as I uncovered not one but multiple cameras, each strategically placed to have a view of the entire room. The realization that I had been under surveillance was horrifying. I immediately disconnected the cameras and stored them away, my mind racing with paranoia and fear. That night, I planned to contact the landlord, a man named Mr. Thompson, about this unsettling discovery, but sleep was elusive and soon a more immediate terror gripped me. The distinct sound of the front door creaking open jolted me awake. It was still dark outside. I was certain I had locked the door. The sound of footsteps echoed from downstairs, sending a shiver down my spine. Frozen in fear, I waited, hoping the intruder would leave. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. Mustering courage, I tiptoed down the staircase. There, to my utter shock, stood Mr. Thompson, his back to me, oblivious to my presence. In a panic, I slipped out the back door and raced to my car. My hands trembling, I dialed 911 and then drove to a colleague's house nearby. When I returned with the police, they informed me that Mr. Thompson was found in my bedroom, a kitchen knife in his hand. The revelation of his intent, coupled with the secret surveillance, painted a chilling picture of what could have been. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that sometimes lurk behind the mundane. It was a chilly Thursday night, the clock striking midnight as I settled into a window seat on the Line 9 Express, heading back home. The carriage was sparsely populated, a usual sight for this hour. Flicking through articles on my phone, I tried to distract myself from the weariness of a long day. As my stop Greenwood Avenue neared, I glanced up, instinctively scanning the train. That's when I saw him, a young man in his early 20s, sitting diagonally across from me. He was dressed in unassuming jeans and a hoodie. His face expressionless, eyes fixed on me. Our eyes met briefly, and he casually looked away. But something about him set off alarm bells in my mind. His presence felt menacing, his gaze too intense for a casual observer. Shaking off an uneasy feeling, I slipped my phone into my bag, gripping it tightly. I tried to appear calm, even though adrenaline was beginning to course through my veins. The train began to slow, the familiar announcement for Greenwood Avenue crackling through the speakers. I hesitated, pretending to fiddle with my bag, watching him from the corner of my eye. He didn't move, just sat there, pretending to be engrossed in his own thoughts. As the doors slid open, I made a split-second decision and darted out, the cool night air hitting my face. To my horror, he suddenly sprang up and followed, just as the doors were closing. It was clear now he was tailing me, keeping a few steps ahead of me. He ambled towards the exit. I deliberately slowed my pace, almost to a crawl, forcing him to adjust his speed. He tried to appear nonchalant, stretching and looking around aimlessly. I knew he was waiting for me to pass him, to get the upper hand. But I wasn't about to give him that chance. Finally, I mustered the courage to briskly walk past him, ensuring I was out of his reach. He trailed me up the stairs, his presence looming like a dark shadow. Reaching the top, I quickened my steps towards the turnstile, aware of his proximity. The area was deserted, save for a couple of subway employees. The realization hit me. If I stepped outside, it would be just him and me on the quiet streets of my neighborhood. I couldn't risk leading him to my home. In a sudden move, I spun around and faced him. He stopped in his tracks, looking up at the ceiling in feigned innocence before turning around and heading back down to the platform, taking a route in the opposite direction. As he descended, he looked back at me. The facade of nonchalance had vanished. His eyes bore into mine with unmasked hatred. It was a chilling moment, one that confirmed all my fears. I lingered for a moment, ensuring he wasn't doubling back, then hurried home, constantly looking over my shoulder. The thought haunted me. He was out there, possibly seeking another target. The encounter left me shaken, a stark reminder of the lurking dangers in the quietest hours of the night. I was 17 when my guardians, Aunt Clara and Uncle Joe, decided to visit Europe for a fortnight, leaving me in charge of our old Victorian house in rural Pennsylvania. That autumn was particularly chilly and foggy, adding an eerie feeling to our already isolated neighborhood. It was just me and my 3 cousins, Lily, Rose, and young Emma. One stormy night, I was jolted awake, not by the thunder, but by Lily, the eldest cousin. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her phone clutched tightly as she argued with her boyfriend, perhaps teetering on the brink of a breakup. I immediately checked the windows and doors, ensuring they were secured, slightly puzzled about what had awakened me. It seemed like Lily's distress was the cause. After calming Lily down, I assumed the howling wind had triggered our overly sensitive alarm system. I drifted back to sleep, only to be awakened again, this time by Emma's piercing screams. The alarm was shrieking once more. Annoyed, I told her to turn it off, which she hastily did. That's when I heard the distinct sound of our glass conservatory door closing. My heart raced. I waited, motionless, trying to hear any signs of intrusion. Nothing. Then survival instincts took over. I darted into the kitchen, grabbed the largest knife, and with Emma clinging to my arm, still on the phone, oblivious to the danger, I checked the entire house. Peering out of the basement window, I saw nothing but the storm's fury. But as I drew the curtains of the dining room, a chill ran down my spine. There, standing ominously, were a pair of muddy boots belonging to a shadowy figure staring intently at our house. Panic-stricken, I called 911 and rushed to an upstairs window for a better view. A strange man was swiftly moving to a car parked by the neighbor's fence, a car I had never seen before. He drove away slowly, rolling down his window, locking eyes with me in a chilling stare. The police arrived minutes later, dismissive of my fears, suggesting it was all a product of my imagination. They advised me to stay calm, lock up, and not to waste their time. We never experienced anything like it again, but the memory of that night lingers. I told Aunt Clara and Uncle Joe about the ordeal, but they too were skeptical. Nevertheless, I know what I saw, and that harrowing night will forever be etched in my mind. Ever since I was young, I would frequently visit my Aunt Evelyn. She lived in a secluded two-story Victorian house surrounded by dense woods. The house, with its creaking floors and antique furniture, had a certain eerie charm, but it was the attic that always unsettled me. Despite its spaciousness, the attic felt suffocating, with a peculiar small door in the corner that led to a hidden storage room. I had always been apprehensive about that attic. The small door, in particular, seemed to emanate a strange, foreboding aura. I avoided it at all costs, but one rainy afternoon, Aunt Evelyn needed help retrieving old family photo albums stored there. As we climbed the narrow attic stairs, a sense of dread filled me. The rain pattered rhythmically against the roof, creating an unsettling ambience. Aunt Evelyn, noticing my hesitation, reassured me with a smile before leaving me alone to answer a sudden phone call downstairs. She promised to be right back. Alone in the attic, my anxiety escalated. Despite the daylight seeping through the small window, the space felt unnaturally dark. That's when things took a terrifying turn. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling began to flicker, casting eerie shadows. Unnerving whispers echoed around me, not from downstairs, but from behind the small door. My heart pounded as I heard my name being called in Aunt Evelyn's voice. Confused and scared, I wondered how she could be in the storage room when she had just gone downstairs. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I edged towards the door. The closer I got, the more intense my dread became. As my hand reached for the doorknob, the light bulb died completely, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged within me, and I wanted nothing more than to flee. But then, I heard my name again, Aunt Evelyn's voice pleading for help from behind the door. I opened it hesitantly. Pitch blackness enveloped me. I couldn't see a thing, but a faint, chilling laughter echoed in the darkness, stretching on endlessly. Then, as abruptly as it had started, the laughter ceased. The light flickered back to life, momentarily easing my fear. With the light's return, I could now see into the storage room. There, amidst old furniture and boxes, sat a small clown doll. Aunt Evelyn detested clowns. It made no sense for it to be there. Perplexed and frightened, I couldn't comprehend its presence. Then, the light flickered again, revealing what looked like red stains splattered everywhere. A scream escaped my lips as I blacked out. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the living room couch, Aunt Evelyn's concerned face hovering over me, inquiring if I was all right. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that attic, but the memory of it still haunts me.